Hello everyone. Welcome to the session on Concat adapters, which provides you with an easy and elegant way of combining adapters. And My name is Abhishesh. I work here at Dream 11 as an Android engineer. We are trying to build best fantasy sports gaming experience for users. Now, as you see, list UI is a very common component which almost every Android application has. And every Android application you would think of would have a list of something to display. So let's look at a list on the screen. And here we have a requirement of showing some list header and a list items. And it is coming from some data source network, let's say. So the way you would model this in code would be something like you would have an adapter where you would override get item view type, and based on the position checks, you will return whether header needs to be shown or data source item types. Too simple, isn't it? And let's say the requirement has changed now, and now in the sprint 2 onwards, a new list has to be shown below the first list. And the data source this time is different. It is not coming from the same REST API, which was coming earlier. And let's say the data source is some local data source. And this model, how would you model this? Like, so let's say in the adapter, you would have some bunch of position-based checks for determining the view type. And based on the data source and position, you will model it. And the code would look something like this. Let's say in the sprint 3 onwards, a new data source has to be shown with some new list UI, and that UI has to be inserted in the middle of the existing list. So again, the developers would code in some way like the get item view type would look something like this. And this is the most simplest form of get item view type you can imagine for this use case. Because if you start considering the cases where data source is being null, then there would be a couple of more if statements here. And this is the kind of get item view type would be there. So if you look at this code, this doesn't look something which can scaled up, and it has a lot of and like problems with the code, and kind of very messy also it looks. And as you can see, the name here also is a hell adapter. So let's look at the problems with the piece of code which we have seen just now. So the number one problem statement which I can see is like the endless if else if statements. And the second problem with this is the maintenance. Let's suppose a new developer comes and he wants to add some new functionality here. He would be definitely very afraid of adding any new features here or making changes to this code base, because you have so many position based checks, and the logic could blow up anytime with the new requirements. And one very important principle which it breaks is the single responsibility principle. So right now, as you can see in the example, which is in the get item view type, the adapter is overloaded with a lot of responsibilities. The first responsibility is it has to merge all the data sources and then have some presentation logic to determine the view types. And also, let's say a requirement is there, you want to show some same list, let's say list one, and you want to display it on some other screen. You cannot do that. The only way you can do is cherry pick some code and write a new adapter file for it, and then make the changes. And with that, the problem is if there is any changes to that list, you'll have to make those changes at two places. So this is kind of like you're breaking the single responsibility principle. So, and the last, like one more problem with the existing code base is like the individual list item code cannot be reused, because the whole logic is merged in one single list. So it is very problematic to reuse the existing code. So let's look at the solution, how we can solve this. So Android has provided an abstraction for this problem to solve, and the here comes Concat adapters to the rescue. And we also have some other alternatives. Like a couple of years back, Epoxy from Airbnb and Bento from Yelp. They also kind of work on the similar principle and has solved those problems. So let's look at ConcatAdapters. So ConcatAdapters was added in Recycler View 1.2.0 Alpha 02, and at that time it was named as merge adapter. And then later in release 1.2.0 Alpha 04, it got renamed to ConcatAdapter. And the folks out there who are like trying to find ConcatAdapter in Alpha 02 version, go look out for merge adapter or upgrade your library to latest. And what it does, ConcatAdapter, it basically presents content of multiple adapters in a sequence. So let's look at this diagram. So the case which we have shown earlier, in that there were three lists. So visualize as each list as different adapters backed by different adapters, and you can sequentially merge all those adapters. So you don't have to worry about writing the complex logic. You can just encapsulate all of the adapters and later sequentially concatenate them. So let's look at like why do we need concat adapters? The very first reason that it encapsulate adapters rather than merging data source and adapter into one. So you don't have to worry about writing all those merging logics. Concat adapter would provide you an abstraction to do that. And the only thing you will have to focus is on writing each individual list UI. And the second is it is less error prone since you are not writing any wiring logic there. So, and a lot of if statement will also be gone. So the it would be very less error prone. And the third very important point is the code can be reused. Now, since you are structuring your UI and each adapter correspondingly, so individual adapters code can be reused. So later, if we have a requirement of showing a list somewhere else on the screen or somewhere else, then individual adapter code can be reused. Just a second. And also the code complexity has been reduced to a lot, just because the same fact, like we don't have any wiring logic right now, and we don't have to think about merging data sources. The code complexity is very simple. You just have to create adapter according to the single list. And also uh, let's say the same example, if three developers are working, they can individually work on their list UI, and later they can just use the ConcatAdapter APIs and merge it and display. So let's look at some of the code. So if we have to do the earlier example with the ConcatAdapter way, so we'll have a adapter like awesome adapter, then there would be a great adapter, then there would be a single adapter, and then just pass it all the list to the ConcatAdapter and just set it on recycler view, and you're good to go. And also let's look at some of the APIs of ConcatAdapters. So one API is add adapter. So basically consider these APIs can be used in cases like you have to show expand collapse kind of features. So consider a case you add adapter basically accepts an index and adapter, and it basically adds that adapter to that specified index. And one thing to note here is that the index is not the recycler view item index. It is the index of the adapter list, which is maintained by the Concat adapter. So, so let's say you have a two list and you want to add the third list. So, and you are adding it at first position, then it will be inserted in middle. And then let's look at remove adapter. So basically you pass it a adapter and it will remove that adapter. So in the case, like I mentioned, expand collapse, you can use these two in conjunction and get expand collapse functionality. Also, if you see the constructor APIs here, so there is one constructor which accepts a list of adapters, and then there is one constructor which accepts where arguments of adapters, and then there is one more constructor which also accepts a config API and list of adapter. So let's look at config, what config API does. So config API has config API basically takes two parameters. One is the isolate view types, and then second one is the stable ID mode. So let's look at what is isolate view types. So by default, the isolate view type value is set to true, which means that each adapter, individual adapters, would have their own set of recycler view pool, and they will never share a common global view pool. And one thing to note, you might have a question like, let's say my adapters and each adapters are returning the same get item view type, integer, let's say one. But ConcatAdapter takes care of that also. In case the adapters are returning the same get item view type, then it has a wrapper over it internally, and it encodes with a value so that the get item view type is always unique at ConcatAdapter level. And if you have a requirement where the list view holders are same and you want to reuse, then pass config as isolate view type as false, and you're good to go and you'll gain some performance benefits out of it. Let's look at the second stable ID mode. So by default, there are three stable ID mode provided. One is the no stable ID, then the second one is isolated stable IDs, and the third is shared stable IDs. So by default, the mode is no stable IDs, where individual adapters stable ID would be ignored. Then there is stable isolated stable IDs. Individual adapters can have stable IDs, and let's say if two adapters are returning the same stable IDs, in that case also ConcatAdapter takes care of it. It has some internal logic where it encodes each adapter stable ID so that the same stable ID is not reported to the backing recycler view. And the third one is the shared stable ID. So it means in this case, this should be only used when all the adapters are aware of each other, and child adapter should never report the same stable ID because that can cause conflict. So very careful while using this. Now let's look at some other APIs. So what would happen if you call any of the notify methods on your adapter? So basically, if you're calling notify item range changed or notify item inserted or individual adapter, only that adapter notify would be called. But if you're calling notify data set change method, then recycler view has no way to know about like which no how to properly call the notify item ranged on their internal API. So it calls notify dataset change on the concat adapter, and adapter basically calls notify dataset change on all of the individual adapters. So there can be some performance problem with this approach if you're going to use notify dataset change, because if you are notifying a single adapter, it would notify all of the adapter, and so be careful while using this. And also one very important principle on which concat adapter works is it favors composition. And by composition I mean like you're using individual adapters as a black box, and whatever the individual adapters are doing, concat adapter is not like does not care about the internal implementation. It only has to care about the exposed APIs and how they are returning the values. And composition, and think of adapter here as in Lego pieces. So basically you can compose different Lego pieces and form a structure. So that is how you can think of using the concat adapters. Apart from that, there is one more method in the view holder. Like if you want to find the position of a view holder, so normally what you call is get adapter position. So that would return you the exact position of the view holder in the recycler view. But if you want to know the position in the individual adapters, then you should use a get binding adapter position. So so that is the call, that is the method you can use. And also, if you want to work for some cool features and building some cool stuff, so you can check out Dream 11 Carriers. We are hiring for our team. Q&A. can the items be interleaved? As you said, they are merged sequentially. So, I mean, let's say if you have two adapters, so they cannot be interleaved, they will be merged sequentially only. And basically, this API provides you a way with implementing sequential concatenation. How can we support horizontal scrolling list in the example? So that's a very good question. And if you see the modern UI like Play Store or some, there you'll see a vertical list and then there are multiple horizontal lists. So that could be supported using the ConcatAdapter APIs. And the backing view holder should have a recycler view, and that recycler view would be supporting the horizontal scrolling. Next question. I think that's all. Like we don't have any question, so we can end the session. And thank you once again, everyone, for joining the session. It was amazing speaking virtually in front of all of you. Thanks once again.